Hey guys, tonight we glide through quiet velvet-lined hallways inside Topkapi Palace where the shadows stretch long and even dust seems to tiptoe. You're not a guest. You're not a scribe. You're something stranger, an invisible observer in a world ruled not by swords or scrolls, but by stray threads, soft fluffs, and a feather's worth of misplaced fuzz. You probably won't survive this one, especially if you've ever scoffed at the idea of Lint being a full-time imperial occupation. But here in the Ottoman court, fluff was fate, and someone had to collect it, catalog it, and make absolutely sure it never embarrassed the empire. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know if you're listening from a palace pillow at midnight, or just hiding from your own laundry pile. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the corridor barefoot. The stone is warm from the fading night, but there's a thin veil of softness beneath your toes, not quite a rug, not quite air, just lint. You crouch. Rub your fingers along the edge of a gold-trimmed curtain. There it is, a pale curl of thread, harmless, innocent, until someone finds it on the Sultan's robe. That's why you're here. Or rather, that's why he's here. The lint collector-in-chief. You don't see him at first, but you hear the rhythmic swish of his whisk broom, the softest in the empire, made from silk horsetail strands. It doesn't scatter dust, it charms it. Mainstream historical fact. In the height of the Ottoman Empire palace, cleanliness was managed by a complex hierarchy of attendants, including roles specifically focused on textile maintenance and fabric inspection. While the title Lint Collector-in-Chief might sound absurd, the palace housed dozens of micro-specializations dedicated to preserving the visual perfection of royal garments and interiors. You round a column and see him finally tall, thin, with the gait of a man who's walked more carpets than roads. He wears gloves, not to protect his hands, but to prevent oils from transferring to the tapestries. His belt holds small tools, a curling pin for tassels, a pair of tiny scissors, a wax-threaded lint journal. He stops beside a long window curtain, embroidered with tulips. His hand hovers, pauses, then gently lifts a single thread from the seam and places it in a paper envelope. You blink. He's not cleaning. He's documenting. And here's your first fringe fact of the night. According to one 17th century palace inventory, stray threads found in the wrong quarters were considered a form of negligence or sabotage. Historians still argue whether lint was ever used to frame someone, but at least one court log mentions a concubine accused of planting damask fuzz on a rival's prayer cushion. You follow as he continues down the corridor, pausing only when he reaches a cushion left out from the previous night's reading. He inspects it like a jeweler, tilting it, brushing against the pile, sniffing the corner. Then he straightens, nods once, and scribbles something in his ledger. Another day has begun, and Lint, silent, patient, ever-present, awaits its reckoning. You trail the lint collector-in-chief through the eastern gallery where gold-tasseled drapes catch the morning light and dust motes dance like court jesters auditioning for relevance. He doesn't glance at them. They're too large, too obvious. His prey is finer, subtler, the type of fluff that lives between velvet folds and waits for ceremonial disaster. He pauses near a window seat upholstered in crimson silk. You watch as he pulls a small brush from his belt, a fan of oiled cotton tied with black thread, and gives a single whisper-light stroke along the piping. A curl of silver-blue lint clings to it. He flicks it onto a piece of wax paper, folds it twice, and marks the corner with a number. You blink. That number isn't just for sorting. It's evidence. Mainstream historical fact. Ottoman court life was governed by intricate protocols of appearance and textile hygiene. Servants were assigned specific duties based on fabric type, room, and proximity to royalty. Uniformed inspections ensured that no thread, hair, or fragment of fluff ever risked marring the visual perfection of a royal audience. The Lint Collector, technically under the aegis of the Kisler Asa. Chief Black Eunuch had one of the strangest powers in the Empire, the right to delay a ceremony if visible lint was found. Not reset, not rush, delay. You step into the royal salon where 14 cushions line the marble floor like sleepy nobles. He moves silently, fingers hovering over each one like a dowsing rod. You watch him pause near a square pillow embroidered with gold crescents. His eyes narrow. There tucked in the seam is something pale and soft, almost invisible. He removes it gently and rolls it between his fingers. Then comes the unexpected. He sniffs it. You lean in curious. He mutters camel hair. Not from this room. And there it is, the other half of his job provenance. He's not just collecting lint. He's tracing its origin. Each fiber tells a story. Where it drifted from. Who passed through? What garment may have shed it? Fringe detail incoming. Archival records from the Palace Cleaning Guild include reports where certain lint types were labeled with nicknames, mourning fluff for dark fibers found after death. Anniversaries, pilgrim strands for dusty cotton carried in from Mecca-bound garments. Historians still argue whether this naming system was official or the work of one poetic janitor with too much time and too many threads. You follow him into a narrow chamber lined with ceremonial sashes and feathered capes. The sashes are arranged by rank. The feathers, ostrich, peacock, even hoopoe, stand like rows of sleeping birds. And there's lint here too. Lots of it. He sighs, draws his sleeve down, and begins his work. This isn't a battle against dirt. It's a ballet against chaos. And his tool belt surprisingly advanced. A goosebone tweezer, a static dampening puff, a double-sided lint knife. Every item worn like a knight's arsenal, except instead of slaying dragons, he defeats fabric. He stops beside a mirror, checks his collar, and brushes a single white fiber from his shoulder. Then he looks at you not directly, just sideways, and says, "Even the collector must not leave a trail." You nod, half in respect, half in existential dread. Because here in the heart of the Empire, the highest disgrace isn't blood on silk. It's lint. You follow him deeper into the inner chambers where rugs grow thicker and the silence turns ceremonial. You can feel it now, the weight of protocol pressing into the very threads beneath your feet. This isn't just a palace. It's a textile ecosystem, and you're walking through its most regulated zone. The lint collector-in-chief pauses before an ornately carved door. He produces a small key from a pouch at his waist and unlocks it, revealing not treasure, not secrets, but a scroll cabinet. Inside parchment. Dozens of them. Rolled. Sealed. Tagged with delicate red ribbons. These are the lint laws. Mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman court operated under complex codes of cleanliness and attire maintenance, many of which were written down, reviewed annually, and updated, depending on seasonal needs or shifts in ceremony. While not always called lint laws per se, these regulations governed textile upkeep to the point that entire pages of palace procedure were devoted to fabric proximity, folding technique, and hair particle protocols. He pulls one scroll down and unrolls it on a velvet-covered lectern. You squint at the tight Ottoman script, and though you can't read all of it, certain phrases stand out. Royal proximity threshold. Fluff emergence zones. Feather conflict clauses. He taps one clause with his finger and mutters, "Here, Article 43, the peacock rule." You raise an eyebrow. Feathered garments must not be stored beside woolen rugs, he says, like it's obvious. Feathers shed. Wool attracts. It's war. Fringe detail. Some Ottoman feathered robes were so elaborate, crafted from layers of ostrich, duck, and peacock plumage, that they were forbidden in high-traffic areas for fear they'd leave a trail of fluff behind. Historians still argue whether the infamous Blue Corridor incident of 1653, when the Sultan tripped on a feather while entering the imperial divan, led to an actual ban or just a heated scroll amendment. The lint collector closes the scroll with a reverent snap and returns it to its cradle. Then he leads you into the feather chamber. It's hard to breathe. Not from dust, but from grandeur. Here, rows of imperial turbans rest on silver stands, each one crowned with a feather so pristine, so still, they might as well be dreaming. You see a white ostrich plume longer than your forearm, a spiral-tipped egret feather dyed saffron, one crowned with what looks suspiciously like ruby dust, and floating among them all like pollen in a cathedral is lint, soft, sneaky, everywhere. You watch the collector go still, then surgical precision. He withdraws a fan-shaped tool and moves in slow circles, coaxing particles downward with a series of gentle sweeps. When he finishes, he claps his hands once. A boy appears, young, pale, serious. He carries a shallow, lacquered tray and stands silently as the collector deposits today's plume lint with solemn care. Then comes the unexpected twist. The boy opens a logbook and begins categorizing the deposit not just by quantity but by origin and texture. 6 strands, he says softly. 2 from peacock ceremonial. 3 from the Circassian fur trim. 1, possibly pillow linen. The collector frowns. Pillow. Here from the harem. The boy hesitates. Unknown. The weave is ambiguous. A long pause. You realize in this room ambiguity is worse than fluff. The collector sighs. Put it under investigation. He turns to you. This, he says, is what I call feather protocol. Lint is not debris. Lint is evidence. And you believe him. Because here in the feathered lungs of empire fluff is the whisper that someone crossed a line. You follow him now with a kind of reverence, your steps lighter, more deliberate, as if your very presence might dislodge a forbidden thread. You pass under an archway embroidered with Quranic verses into a salon lined with plush divans and hanging tapestries that shimmer with silver thread. The air is thick with clove and sandalwood. You sneeze, quietly. He turns expression unreadable. Velvet, he says. It hoards lint like a jealous wife. You nod solemnly as if you've always known this. He kneels by a royal cushion so ornate it practically demands a security detail. His gloved hand glides across the brocade surface, then hovers like a hawk sensing the tremble of prey. His fingers dip into the seam. A clump emerges, tiny, harmless, pale brown like a puff of dandelion gone rogue. He sniffs it, of course. Horsehair lining, left over from the ambassadorial cloak. You try not to gasp. That cloak had been worn 3 weeks ago. Mainstream historical fact. Royal cloaks in the Ottoman Empire were often padded with horsehair goose down or camel fleece, depending on the season and rank of the wearer. Each material had distinct lint behavior. Horsehair in particular shed microscopic bristles that clung to fabrics and carpets alike, causing palace staff to dedicate extra inspections after diplomatic visits. You ask timidly. So, it's dangerous. He arches one eyebrow. If found on the sultan's sleeve during prayer? Yes. He wraps the offending puff in paper and labels it divan. East, ambassadorial shedding, level moderate. You're not sure if the level refers to quantity or threat. You don't ask. Fringe detail. Now a scroll from 1661 describes an incident in which a feather-flecked lint ball was discovered on the floor of the imperial mosque. The ensuing panic led to 3 departments being scrubbed, interrogated, and allegedly rebuilt with smoother marble. Historians still argue whether the whole affair was an overreaction or whether it uncovered deeper tensions among palace factions. You cross the room to a mirror framed in ivory. There, caught between the edge of a cushion and a carved leg, is a single thread red-looped and frayed at the end. The collector sees it too. He sighs. Peacock plume fringe, torn, probably from the ceremonial headdress of the Shehzadeh. He crouches, lifts it delicately, then holds it to the light. This is the softest enemy, he murmurs. He turns toward the light again, eyes narrowing. You follow his gaze. It's the curtain, a pale streak across the inner lining. Almost invisible, but it catches the morning sun in the wrong way just enough to announce its treachery. He approaches like a man walking into battle. He brushes once, twice. More comes free. A cascade of nearly invisible lint dislodges like snow dust. It's shedding, he mutters. You lean in. The curtain is silk, but old. Too old. The thread count loosened, the dye cracking. It's begun to molt, and now it's seeding the palace with betrayal. The collector straightens. This whole panel must go. You blink. The curtain, he nods gravely. The source must be removed. Lint isn't the problem. Origins are. And just like that, a servant is summoned. He whispers the order. Replace with jacquard weave, tighter, less fluff. The servant bows and vanishes. And you just stand there. A witness to the judgment of textiles. A spectator to the excommunication of an over-linty curtain. Because in this palace, even softness can be a scandal. You descend now slowly into the underbelly of Topkapi, where sunlight doesn't reach, and the air carries that quiet scent of clay jars and old parchment. The lint collector's pace slows as he pushes open a wooden hatch, revealing a spiral staircase that winds downward like a coiled ribbon of rules and secrets. It's cooler here, damper too. Your breath makes tiny puffs in the air. A lantern flickers to life ahead of you, carried by a boy with ink-stained fingers and a permanently furrowed brow. He leads the way into what feels less like a basement and more like a vault. You've arrived at the storage of the fluff. Mainstream historical fact. The Ottomans were meticulous record keepers, and even minor palace functions involved detailed logging. While there's no official confirmation of a literal lint archive, records from the imperial laundry and textile offices include itemized lists of fabric waste, thread losses, and textile residue that were saved, weighed, and in some cases ceremonially disposed of. The collector gestures toward the shelves, rows and rows of pigeonhole cubbies, each holding small cotton pouches tagged with dates and initials. Some bear red wax seals. Others are tied shut with silk string, a tiny lead tag dangling from each like a forgotten heirloom. He selects one pouch from a middle shelf and holds it to his ear. Not joking. He listens, then smiles. Still dry, he says. Humidity hasn't spoiled it. You blink. Spoiled what? He opens it carefully. Inside is a small disc of compressed fiber, mostly beige, with a streak of gold and what looks like a fragment of green embroidery thread embedded at its center. Coronation pillow lint, he says softly. Fringe tidbit. Some palace staff believe that lint collected during royal events held symbolic weight, as if it had absorbed the emotion, tension, or spiritual residue of the moment. There are references in obscure cleaning manuals to charging lint with energy, and even one record of a ball of fluff being buried beside a prince's shoes. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, symbolism, or just someone trying to avoid sweeping. He replaces the pouch, steps over to a small desk, and opens a bound volume with a feather clasp, the Lint Index. Page after page of categorized entries. 8 Safar 1072. Source. Harem concubine corridor. Third window alcove type pale linen, twisted with cat hair. Notes tension among the Georgian attendants suspected. You read another. 17. Jumada Al-Thani 1095 Source. Royal audience room. Rear cushion seam. Type peacock plume and parchment corner. Notes. Possibly from imperial decree. Roll. Investigate. You look at the collector. You don't just clean it, you archive it. He nods. We measure not just the lint, but the moment it came from. He closes the book, then opens a drawer. Inside, dozens of tiny glass vials, each filled with lint samples preserved in oil. The particles float suspended like snowflakes in amber. For educational purposes, he murmurs. Pattern analysis. Trace lineage. You'd be surprised how well a ball of fluff holds its story. You sit on a stool, stunned. In this room, every speck matters. Every thread is a time capsule. And somewhere deep in the Ottoman archives, there's probably a lint record with your name on it now. The door creaks open behind you and a narrow figure slips in, eyes darting, boots soft. A janissary, though not in full uniform. He looks like a man caught between duty and mischief. He leans toward the lint collector and mutters something low. You only catch part of it. Found in the sash, not listed, was folded twice. The collector's posture straightens. The ledger is snapped shut. The vial drawer clicked closed. He gives you a brief glance and then nods toward a side passage. Walk with me, he says. You follow into a narrower corridor, one with tapestries drawn back and plain stone beneath your feet. It feels less like palace and more like backstage, the nervous ribcage of empire. There's tension, now quiet and pointed. The janissary follows a step behind, hands behind his back, clearly trying not to look like he's eavesdropping while obviously doing just that. Mainstream historical fact. Ottoman palace staff, including janissaries stationed as interior guards, were often drawn into minor investigations, especially ones involving harem politics, fabric theft, or breaches in ceremonial protocol. These reports were filed into the Imperial Record Office under House Incidents, a real category historians still mine today. The collector stops near a long bench once used for turban storage. He reaches into a seam in the upholstery and pulls out a rolled cloth. Carefully, he unrolls it. Inside is lint, not just any lint. A braid of lint coiled, flattened, and tied in the middle with a red thread. You feel it in your stomach. This was placed. Deliberate. Intentional. Fringe detail. Incoming, a rare 17th century palace record mentions secret fibers being used to pass illicit messages between the harem and certain court factions. Lint, when twisted and layered, could mimic codes used by paper folders and message runners. Historians still argue whether this was real or an elaborate cover for intercepted notes, but at least one entry describes the blue fluff that caused 4 reassigned guards. The collector studies the braid, then sniffs it. Tulip oil, he mutters. That's new. He nods to the janissary, who produces a slate tablet. They sketch the braid together, 5 loops, 1 knot, 3 loose ends. You can't decode it, but they seem to read it like punctuation. This came from a sash pocket, the collector asks. Yes, Royal Guard. Visiting the 4th courtyard. Where is the guard now? Gone. Claimed he was fetching towels. The collector sighs. Towels, he repeats. Always the towels. He folds the lint braid into a small paper triangle, seals it with wax, and slips it into his ledger pouch. Then he turns to you. Most think lint just floats, he says, but it lingers, it remembers. He places a gloved hand on the stone wall beside him, and sometimes it spies. You glance back toward the shadowed hallway, half expecting to see someone watching. But there's no one. Just a trail of barely visible fluff curling toward a side door. Evidence, motion, memory, and suddenly you realize lint isn't just the record of things left behind. It's the Empire's most patient witness. You return to the main gallery, where light has crept further into the palace and the warmth of day now brushes the silk-covered walls. But the air is heavy not with dust, but with accusation. There's tension in the antechamber. A hush that hovers just above conversation. You hear the rustle of robes, the shuffle of slippers, and then sharp voices. You peek around the carved wooden screen and see 2 men in mid-dispute. The chief laundryman, wide-shouldered and red-faced, stands nose to nose with none other than the lint collector-in-chief. Between them on a lacquered tea tray sits a single pale tuft of lint. You immediately understand. Someone has found fluff where fluff should not have been. Mainstream historical fact. Within the Ottoman court, cleanliness roles were deeply hierarchical. The Başçıbaşı, chief of the laundry, managed the washing and maintenance of royal garments. The lint collector, while focused on inspection and micro-maintenance, operated with overlapping authority when it came to textiles presented for use in royal functions. This overlap, though bureaucratically logical, occasionally sparked friction between departments. I inspected that sash myself, the laundryman insists. And yet the collector says smoothly, this was found beneath the tassel after procession. Sheet at the moment. His Majesty bowed to the Cadi of Adurn. A dramatic pause. You glance at the offending lint. To the untrained eye, it looks like nothing. But in this world, it's practically an alibi. The laundryman leans forward. Your men handled the robe after mine. Perhaps one of them. The collector cuts him off. Impossible. We wear gloves. And we do not permit lint to follow us. The fringe detail flutters in palace gossip once described a notorious scandal in 1704 when a rogue cushion seam burst open during a holiday ceremony, releasing a cascade of feather lint across the Sultan's dais. 3 heads of department were demoted, and one allegedly disappeared into a laundry basket and was never seen again. Historians still argue whether this story was literal, metaphorical, or just invented by bored towel boys. Back in the gallery, the argument simmers. I want a recount of the folding inventory, the collector says. All seam weight reports. Today, the laundryman huffs, folds his arms, then grumbles something in Turkish that sounds like over-glorified broom handler. The collector doesn't flinch. He simply picks up the tuft with his tweezers, seals it into a glass slip, and whispers, "We don't need to shout." The lint already spoke. The chief laundryman storms out. The room exhales. You look at the collector, still calm, still utterly composed. He brushes his sleeve and looks down at the tray again. Fluff is never just fluff, he says. It's failure. Or worse, neglect. He gestures for you to follow him through a velvet-draped archway. Come, he murmurs. There's a prayer cushion that smells of lavender but feels suspicious. You hesitate, suspicious how he smiles faintly, heavy on scent, light on loyalty. And with that cryptic pronouncement, he disappears into the corridor, robes gliding over polished marble, leaving nothing behind. Except you. And of course, a barely visible thread curling in the air like a tiny flag of accusation. You slip into the hammam just behind him, barefoot, on the warm tiles where steam curls like secrets and the marble sweats beside you. It's humid here, oppressively so, and even the air seems to soften as you breathe it. Lanterns glow dim behind latticed panels, and every surface gleams with water or oil or both. But the lint collector walks in like he owns the mist. His stride is precise, measured, unbothered. His gloved fingers float just above the nearest bench, the way a musician might hover over an instrument waiting for the first note. You pass through archways into a quieter chamber, a resting alcove warm but dry. Rolled towels, folded linens, and bathing sashes are stacked neatly, but he's already focused on the largest cushion by the fountain. Mainstream historical fact. Ottoman hammams were not just public bathhouses but sacred spaces in the palace complex, reserved for ritual cleansing before prayer ceremonies and political meetings. The palace hammam adhered to strict textile rotation protocols, and certain towels were reserved for royalty alone. Sometimes embroidered with protective verses from the Quran. He picks up a towel and flicks it lightly. A single puff of thread escapes and drifts upward in the steamy haze. He tracks it with his eyes. Then, with a deft movement, he plucks it from the air and lowers it to his inspection mirror. Goat thread, he says, from the south storeroom. Shouldn't be in this rotation. He turns to a young attendant nearby, no older than 14, still damp from scrubbing tiles. Who stocked this pile? The boy swallows, stammers, and points vaguely toward the laundry entrance. The collector doesn't raise his voice. He simply hands the offending towel over. Rewash, and send it with an ink-marked thread so I know where it ends up. The boy nods and vanishes into the steam. Fringe detail within the hammam lint wasn't just a cleaning concern, it was a ritual boundary. According to one preserved manual of hammam protocol, entering the royal bath with lint on your robe could invalidate the cleansing if discovered. Some servants wore hooded capes lined with slick silk purely to repel dust and thread in transit. Historians still argue whether this was based on hygiene symbolism or simple superstition. The collector walks deeper into the hammam now toward a private alcove cordoned off with hanging damask. He parts the curtain with a fingertip. You see a single golden cushion round with embroidered palm fronds and a tiny satin edge. He kneels, brushes it. Nothing. He brushes again. Something. It's not just lint. It's coiled, dark, stuck to the seam like it doesn't want to be found. He removes it gently, examines it, and frowns. Threaded horsehair. From a harem matron's shawl. Shouldn't be here. They never bathe at this hour. You ask, so someone broke ritual. He doesn't answer. He just seals the hair in a scroll of parchment and mutters, cleanliness is trust. This place is sacred. You realize something chilling. In the palace hammam, a single thread can unravel status schedules, even secrets. And somewhere in the mist, you wonder how many scandals began with a misplaced puff of fluff. You emerge from the hammam trailing warm air and lavender ghosts. The lint collector walks ahead without speaking, his robes swinging just above the floor like a brush made of silence. He takes a turn you don't recognize past the kitchens around a corner, lined with brass oil lamps, and finally stops before a lacquered cabinet that hums with quiet reverence. He lifts the latch. Inside lies a small silk-wrapped box. A violet ribbon holds it shut and a perfumed wax seal glints at its center. He doesn't open it right away. First, he bows slightly. Then, with gloved hands, he breaks the seal and unfolds the fabric. Inside a delicate bundle of folded paper tied with golden thread. You lean in. At first, it looks like a letter. But he opens it, and instead of ink, you see something softer. A pressed nest of pillow lint, pale as a morning light folded like a sacred scroll. You stare. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. Ceremonial lint offerings. Mainstream historical fact in Ottoman palace culture, symbolic tokens were often crafted from the mundane rose petals pressed into talismans, trimmed fingernails buried with prayer scrolls, even hair clippings sealed into silver lockets. Among the rarer records are mentions of textile remnants of proximity items touched by the Sultan's body preserved and sometimes gifted or archived for ceremonial purposes. This, the collector whispers, was taken from the Sultan's pillow after his victory dream in 1591. You blink. Victory. Dream, he nods. He dreamed of a white eagle flying over Belgrade. The next week, the fortress surrendered. The pillow lint was saved. Blessed. Wrapped in saffron oil, then sealed here. Fringe detail. Time. One lesser-known clerical archive describes a moment where the court astrologer requested lint from the Sultan's turban after a celestial omen. Historians still argue whether the lint held any ritual power or whether this was a case of material fetishization veiled in mysticism, but the fact remains threads mattered. The collector gently returns the bundle to its box. Not all lint is waste, he says. Some is memory. He leads you now into a quiet receiving room. On the low table sits a tray of offerings for an incoming dignitary, gold-threaded slippers, perfumed water, candied almonds, and your eyes go wide, an envelope sealed with a wax moon. He opens it. Inside, a nest of freshly collected lint, scented and labeled. For the emissary, he says. As proof of our precision, you whisper, "You're gifting lint," he smiles faintly. Theirs is a dust-rich court. This will humble them. And you understand suddenly and completely. This isn't just ceremony, it's subtle flex. A clean palace says what 1,000 cannons can't. Control. Purity. Discipline. You sip rose water as the collector reseals the envelope, each motion crisp, precise, reverent. Because in this world, even fluff can deliver a message. And that message is always, we notice everything. You're led now to a long hallway lined with arches, each casting soft shadows over the tiled floor where afternoon light rests like thin cloth. The palace is quieter here. The laughter of pages and clatter of bronze trays have faded. Only the rhythmic scuff of the lint collector's slippers echoes ahead. This is where the apprentices live, the future of fluff, as he puts it. He gestures you through an unassuming wooden door. Inside, 5 boys kneel in near-perfect silence, each holding a different brush boar hair, cotton fan, silk-tipped reed, and one strangely shaped like a dandelion. Their target, a square of velvet fixed to a practice frame. Mainstream historical fact. Ottoman palace roles were structured as apprenticeships from cooks to gardeners to ceremonial sword-bearers. Specialized cleaning positions were no exception. Apprenticeships in the textile and cleaning divisions began early, often around the age of 10, and involved both fabric care and behavioral discipline, including silence, humility, and scent identification. The oldest boy makes a slow, practiced motion with his brush, lifting a tiny lint strand from the velvet like a magician revealing a hidden coin. The younger ones imitate him clumsily. One accidentally flicks his too hard and sends fluff spiraling into the air. The lint collector winces. That, he says gently, is a dust crime. He steps forward, takes the brush, and demonstrates. Slow sweep. Lift, pause, deposit. You must never chase lint. You must invite it. They nod solemnly. He turns to you and says, they practice on royal cast-offs, retired cushions, faded robes. Each texture has a memory. Each flaw reveals a lesson. You notice a chart on the wall, emergency protocol for ceremony lint. It includes steps like Step 1, freeze. Step 2, identify source fabric. Step 3, brush in spiral, motion only. Step 4, pretend you were never there. You raise an eyebrow. Pretend you were never there, he nods. A good collector is invisible, like the enemy. Fringe tidbit. One archived warning from a 1680s apprentice manual reads, if you are seen lifting lint, the Sultan must not wonder why you are there. You must look like you belong. Historians still argue whether this line reflected genuine operational stealth or simply emphasized the collector's role as silent guardian of aesthetic perfection. You watch as one boy is summoned by a bell. It's time for his test. A proctor unrolls a black silk robe across the bench. It's been prepared on purpose with 6 lint types hidden in folds and seams. The boy has 60 seconds. He begins, hands trembling, eyes sharp. 1, 2, miss. 3, pause. The lint collector watches like a hawk. When time's up, the boy bows. 4 out of 6, the proctor announces. There's a silence. Then a quiet sigh. Brush only until nightfall, the collector says softly. No tweezers for 3 days. It's not cruel, it's calibration. Because in the palace, failure isn't measured in blood or coin. It's measured in fibers missed. As you step back into the corridor, the light seems warmer, softer. A stray thread flutters near your ankle, and without thinking, you stoop, catch it midair, and tuck it into your sleeve. The collector notices, and for the first time he nods without words. Approval wrapped in silence. You hesitate at the threshold. The corridor is darker here, quieter, thicker, with the kind of silence people avoid naming. The lint collector raises a hand, signaling you to stop. You wait, as he unties a crimson cord and slowly opens a latticed door, revealing a narrow passage lit by wall sconces and flickering oil lamps. You've entered the harem. This is not a place for lingering. This is a place of whispers and veils of perfume that lingers too long, of footsteps that never echo. And here, of all places, lint does not float innocently. It accuses. Mainstream, historical fact. The imperial harem in the Ottoman Empire was a politically charged space where hundreds of women concubines, servants, tutors, and noble-born wives coexisted under a rigid hierarchy. Surveillance was constant. Even mundane details like pillow placement or robe orientation could be interpreted as power plays. Evidence of fabric out of place could be used in interpersonal rivalries or reported to eunuchs or even the valied sultan. The lint collector steps carefully through the private halls, trailing his fingers along the seams of velvet wall hangings. His expression shifts now, not just focused but guarded. His voice lowers. In here, he says, every fiber is dangerous. You turn a corner and enter a small chamber, intimate, richly decorated, saturated with damask and the scent of orange blossom oil. A brazier crackles quietly in the corner. No one speaks. No one needs to. The collector approaches a fainting couch layered in embroidered throws. He kneels, brushes the underside of a cushion. Nothing. Then something. A thin wisp of pink thread. He doesn't touch it. He stares at it. You realize why. The chamber is reserved for the Valide Sultan, and the pink thread matches the embroidery worn only by one concubine, Yasemin. You look at the collector. Is this proof? He answers without turning. It's provocation. Fringe detail. Several recorded incidents from the 17th century harem archives involve the strategic planting of fabric threads from rival garments to imply unauthorized visits, accidental or not. In one case, a faint trace of blue embroidery thread found on a chamber pot cover led to a concubine's reassignment to a lesser wing. Historians still argue whether these fabric betrayals were manipulated evidence or signs of deeper sabotage networks within the harem. The collector reaches into his pouch, retrieves a scroll of parchment, and very gently rolls the thread inside it without direct contact. He seals it with a drop of scented wax and hands it to a eunuch standing in the shadows. "Deliver to the mistress of linens," he says. The eunuch bows and vanishes like steam. You exhale, carefully. He looks at you now. Lint in the harem is never just lint, he says. It is context. It is timing. You step into another chamber where a younger concubine is being brushed by a servant. Long hair, delicate robe, hands folded in her lap. She locks eyes with the collector as he passes. No words. But there's recognition. You get the feeling she knows exactly what he's here to find, and that she's already made peace with it. The collector lifts the edge of a prayer rug near the far wall and finds a tiny web of mixed threads, one black, one green, one red. He smiles faintly, a composite. He stands. 3/4 of a scandal, he murmurs. And as you exit the harem behind him, the weight of what you've just witnessed presses deeper than any royal decree. Because in the empire's quietest quarters, the battles aren't fought with blades. They're fought with fabric, and won silently with lint. You step into the outer courtyard and blink, because for the first time all day, it's not quiet. It's chaos. Servants dart past with baskets. Cushions are flung over balconies. Carpets are being shaken like giant dusty scrolls of chaos. A janissary stumbles out from a doorway with a mouthful of feathers, coughing like he swallowed a pillow. Somewhere a steward is yelling about lost curtain rings, and 3 potted hyacinths have mysteriously relocated to the fountain. Welcome to spring cleaning season in the palace. And yes, lint is everywhere. Mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman palace underwent thorough seasonal cleaning rituals, particularly in spring, and before major religious holidays like Ramadan and Eid. These deep cleanses involved the entire household staff, and inventories were rechecked for textile integrity. Some servants were even temporarily reassigned based on shedding potential. Certain fabrics were banned entirely during these high-fluff risk weeks. The lint collector-in-chief steps into the storm like a man who's walked through war zones and kept his slippers clean. He surveys the scene, then sighs. "This is when they forget I warned them," he mutters. You watch him approach a pile of garments stacked beside a laundry cart. His gloved hand lifts a sash and gives it a gentle shake, releasing a cloud of white fuzz so thick it could be bottled as winter air. A boy nearby sneezes. The collector hands him a handkerchief. "You see," he says, "we are drowning in fabric mutiny." A gust of wind carries lint through the courtyard like migratory birds. The collector raises a hand. "Shut the north arch, or this will reach the ceremonial hall by sunset." A door slams. Another cushion is thrown. A tray of sherbet topples over someone's slippers. Fringe detail. One documented incident from the 1730s refers to the Lint deluge, when spring cleaning in the palace coincided with a visiting envoy from Venice. Lint drifted into the ceremonial hall and landed on the envoy's shoulder. The Sultan delayed the greeting by 22 minutes, citing textile contamination. Historians still debate whether this was genuine or a convenient political snub. The collector moves faster now, coordinating with a trio of apprentices armed with fans and static brushes. He pulls one aside. "Monitor the stairwell. Yesterday's tapestry is still shedding. Another apprentice bursts from the upper terrace with a small cloth bundle. Sir, it's begun in the harem wing. Again, the collector closes his eyes, then whispers, "Deploy the mop squad." You lean against a pillar watching the world blur into a cottony frenzy. Bits of thread cling to your sleeve. You brush them off reflexively, but he notices. He gives you a long look. You did that without thinking. You nod. He smiles, almost proud. That means it's working. In spring, when the Empire breathes out all its clutter, it's the lint collector who keeps it from suffocating in softness. A commander in a war where every battlefield smells faintly of cedar and feels like the inside of a sofa. You watch as he directs a servant to seal the curtain. Room orders a sweep of the velvet reserve and signs off on 3 replacement cushions, all while scribbling in his ledger and not once stepping on a loose thread. And beneath the fury of flung fabric and shouted orders, you see the quiet truth. He's not cleaning. He's restoring order to a kingdom of fibers. The storm has passed. Afternoon folds into golden hush, and the courtyard once bursting with cushions and servants and chaos now settles into something eerily immaculate. A pigeon hops across a marble step, pecks once at a leftover thread, then loses interest. Even the lint seems to know it's time to behave. You follow the lint collector through a narrow hallway quieter than the rest, until he pauses before a tall wooden cabinet carved with tulip motifs and inlaid mother-of-pearl. He unlocks it with a heavy brass key. It creaks open slowly like a sigh. Inside sits the lint ledger. Not a metaphor. A literal weighty book bound in crimson leather, its pages thick as coin parchment, its spine worn smooth from decades of gloved handling. Mainstream historical fact. While the lint ledger isn't named as such in surviving texts, the Ottomans did keep extensive maintenance records down to the condition of rugs. Repair dates for ceremonial garments and wear patterns in palace corridors. Some of these logs are preserved in Istanbul's Topkapı archives, and many contain cryptic entries that suggest inspection beyond just inventory. He carries it to a low table and opens it reverently. The scent of old wax and lavender wafts upward. You lean in. Each page is beautiful lines inked in precise calligraphy, entries framed with fine gold embellishments. They don't just describe lint, they chronicle it. To Rajab 1124, source Imperial Prayer Bench Cushion. Type goose down plus silk weave fiber. Status recovered. Before noon. Audience notes. Suspect trace from foreign embroidery. Mark 3. Dots in red, 1 in black. Another page, 5 Shaban, 1130. Source. Vizier's shoulder cloak. Type crushed fig stem and camel fuzz. Status found at courtyard gate. Notes disputed origin, fragments match bakery staff. Outcome caution filed under seasonal overlap. He turns a page with care, and this one is different. There's a smear where a name once was. A wax seal has been broken. Below it, a single line is scrawled in a rushed hand. Do not pursue. The thread was meant to be lost. You look at him. He shrugs lightly. Sometimes the ledger edits itself. Fringe tidbit. A recovered letter from an 18th century palace clerk mentioned the cursed pages of the textile report book entries, said to reference individuals who fell from favor and whose garments were stripped from inventory as if they never existed. Historians still argue whether this was metaphorical political or a symptom of deeper archival paranoia. The collector flipped to a fresh page. Today's entry. He begins to write. The brush glides across the paper in loops and swirls. His handwriting is meditative, almost musical. You see your own involvement listed simply as observer neutral. Present at spring shedding. No known contamination. Well, thank you. Then he dips a stamp into golden ink and presses it onto the margin of faint tulip inside a circle. Everything has a signature, he says, even lint. He gently closes the book, locks it, returns it to the cabinet. Only the Valid Sultan and I hold keys, he says casually, like you just watched someone sign off on a fabric-related state secret. And maybe you did. Because here, in this chamber of soft espionage and thread-bound truths, the line between laundry and legacy is finer than a single strand of silk, and far more permanent. You're ushered now toward the innermost garden where the pomegranate trees bend quietly under the weight of ripening fruit and the tiled fountain burbles with that lazy hypnotic rhythm only late afternoon can create. Everything feels slower here, softer, like the palace has exhaled. And in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by 5 apprentices and 3 eunuchs bearing scented water, sits something utterly bizarre. A ball of lint the size of a watermelon, perfectly round, tightly packed, slightly multicolored. If you look closely, grays, creams, flecks of rose, a shimmering thread of gold curling along the top like a crown. You blink, because this isn't a mistake. It's ceremonial. The retirement lint ball. Mainstream historical fact. While no official tradition confirms this object by name, several surviving descriptions from court memoirs and palace letters reference symbolic parting gifts made from collected fabric remnants, sometimes woven, sometimes burned, occasionally buried. One particularly cryptic account refers to the final softness presented before the final silence assumed by historians to be metaphorical, or possibly not. The lint collector walks beside you slower, now older somehow in the sunlight. He approaches the ball with a kind of reverence not unlike how one might approach a relic or a grave. "It's mine," he says. "Everything I've removed. Everything I've preserved." He gestures for you to come closer. You crouch beside it, stunned by its density. It isn't fluffy, it's compressed. Pressed, layered like sediment, an empire told in fluff. Fringe detail. One record from 1719 describes a departing linen master who requested his lifetime's worth of fabric threads be sewn into a robe too soft to wear, which was then placed atop a cedar chest and never opened again. Historians still argue whether this was an act of devotion, vanity, or low-key textile hoarding. You ask, what happens to it now? He smiles. It will be presented to the head of imperial memory. You tilt your head. Wait, that's a real title. He nods. Not everything is written on scrolls. Some things are stored in softness. He reaches down and unties the silken cord holding the lint ball's ceremonial shroud. The apprentices hold their breath. A eunuch begins to sing softly, something wordless, minor keyed. Then the collector does something shocking. He lifts the ball. It takes effort. It has weight. He cradles it. Like a sleeping child, walks it to the foot of the fountain and places it gently on a platform covered in embroidered stars. The head of imperial memory, an ancient woman with eyes like wet paper, approaches. She bows. Then she lifts a vial and pours a trickle of rose water over the ball. It darkens slightly. Steam rises. Silence deepens. Then she speaks just loud enough. "The Empire thanks your hands. May its quiet cling to you." You stand very still. The apprentices bow. The collector, still kneeling, exhales deeply, and for the first time you see what Lint has always been to him. Not nuisance, not refuse, but evidence of care. A slow, soft lifetime remembered in fragments. The palace is nearly asleep now. Evening folds itself into the corners of the courtyard, creeping up silk-draped walls and cooling the stone under your feet. The sky dims to a soft gray blue, and the lanterns begin to glow one by one, like old promises being quietly honored. The lint collector walks beside you slower than before. The ceremony is over. The ball has been sealed in its resting place. No more spring crises. No more feathers on the wrong pillows, just corridors. Long, quiet corridors. You move through one. Now the collector trailing a gloved hand along a wall tapestry as he walks. He doesn't inspect, doesn't pause, just lets it go. And you realize this is the first time he's touched the palace not to fix it, but to say goodbye. Mainstream historical fact. Retirement from palace service, particularly in ceremonial or specialized roles, often involved a slow withdrawal rather than a hard exit. Final walks through familiar quarters. Handovers with new apprentices and subtle rituals mark the end of a courtier's career. Many servants, especially those in invisible roles, were honored through small, deeply symbolic gestures. You pass through the Sultan's outer divan. No one's here now. The cushions are plumped. The carpets have been re-rolled. A low breeze carries the scent of clove and cooled stone. And in that breeze, a single thread drifts. You see it. He sees it. But this time he lets it fall. Fringe detail. One archival oddity tells of a retiring cleaning master who deliberately left a single strand of silk thread near the imperial prayer mat. When asked why, he simply replied, "So they remember I was here." Historians still argue whether this was poetic closure or the softest act of rebellion ever recorded. You climb one last set of stairs and step into the high gallery. It overlooks the central court where the evening azan calls from a distant minaret echoed by the hush of water in the courtyard basin below. The collector stands at the railing. "You can't stop it," he says quietly. "The lint," he nods. It comes back. Always. Even after the ceremony. Even after they replace the drapes, brush the fur, sweep the rugs, it returns. He turns to you, eyes soft but steady. "That's the lesson." You whisper that it's never over. "No." He smiles that care never ends. You do it again, and again, and again. He lifts his ledger one final time, opens the back flap, and pulls out something small. A glass vial, inside a single curl of white thread. "From my first day," he says. "Back when I missed 3 spots and got demoted to corridor duty." He leaves it in your hand. You hold it gently, afraid to breathe too hard. A memory soft and true. You walk him back through the archways where apprentices now sweep silently under the moonlight. One pauses to bow. Another tugs his sash into proper place. The youngest stands stiffly as the collector passes broom upright, heart racing. He places one gloved hand on the boy's shoulder, says nothing, keeps walking. You escort him to the outer gate, past the sentries, down the stone steps, where the smell of fig trees mixes with the sea breeze drifting from the Bosphorus. The final thread of day unwinds behind you, and then he vanishes into the city's shadow. Not with a proclamation, not with a bow, just with the softest silence. And a corridor left just a little cleaner than it was before. You return to the upper chambers alone, the evening, cool brushing against your arms as you pass through the palace's sleeping heart. Everything is still. Everything is ready. The cushions have been smoothed. The curtains hang heavy with dusk. Even the carpets, those great silent oceans of wool, seem to breathe slower now. And in the absence of footsteps, you hear something else. The faintest whisper of movement. A thread shifting, a particle floating. The hush of silk cooling in the night. You walk past the lint ledger's cabinet, its key gently swinging from the lock as if it too is exhaling. You rest your hand there just for a moment, feeling the echo of gloved fingers and featherlight brushes of parchment rustle and steady breath. You understand now. The softness of history, the burden of caring for what can't be seen, the quiet dignity in devoting a lifetime to the things others forget to notice. So you take a breath, let it out slowly, let the day dissolve. Let the corridors stretch long behind your mind. Let the tapestries blur. Let the empire of Lint drift gently into memory. No need to sweep. Not tonight. Tonight even the fluff has found its place. Sleep well,